Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Let's have a look at a game from round 1 of the Altibox Norway Chess Tournament 2020. An over-the-board tournament. They're back at it playing in-person classical time controls. On the white end, Jan-Krzystof Duda, and he's paired against Alireza Firouzja. So let's hop right in. Duda opening with one e4. Firouzja opting for the Caro-Kann defense. We have a mainline Caro-Kann, bishop f5, and we follow this main line for about 14 moves. Let me just sneak a few more in there. Pay particular attention to these next two. I'd like to highlight an opening subtlety some of you may find interesting, and that is knight f3 on move 7, threatening knight e5, attacking the bishop. Black doesn't like the idea of that, so defends e5. And only now do we have h5. So what's the difference? This is something I have questioned. Why not just play h5 on move 7? Well, here's a difference. Here's a reason to not go with h5 first. It's that when knight f3 is played, there's no longer this threat. The bishop isn't on g6 anymore. So what does this mean, or what can it mean? Well, it can mean that once black has a couple prep moves in on the king's side, such as e6 and knight f6, black can consider playing c5 and then deploying the queen knight to its optimal post on c6. Okay, by playing knight f3 first, this is provoking knight d7. Okay, only now h5. The bishop on h7 is too good, needs to go. Bishop d2, tame deployment, but good, out of reach of a knight when the knight is on d5. This bishop will kind of say, I got you under control if there's ever a knight arriving on that square. A good post. I've seen it eventually relocate in some variations to the c3 square after c4 is played. Okay, continuing, we have queenside castles for white, kingside for black. The battle lines are drawn, opposite sides castles position. Who's going to get it? Who's king first? Let's see. Where do we go from here? How to improve? Well, identify a dummy piece. This guy here on g3. Pretty sad. So he's improved. And the g-pawn is ready to roll. c5. This move right here set Duda back into his seat. White's next move took 33 minutes. So what was White thinking about here? What is at least one move he was considering? Well, in the game, bishop e3 was played. What else was he considering? Probably g4. This is a thematic pawn sacrifice you need to be familiar with if you're going to play this line as black. Black takes, rook to g1. This is the classic. You give up some material, but you get some lines towards the enemy king. This knight can't budge. Black has to make these committal moves. Like f5, yeah, very chaotic position. The knight moves. This is going to get busted. It's already winning for white. Anyhow, this sacrifice with g4 is likely something white was weighing at this moment right here on this move 15. In the end, he decided on bishop to e3, increasing the pressure on c5, trying to resolve this tension. Black now goes for a pawn sacrifice, opts to grab the knight on e4, improve the knight on d7. The b pawn is up for grabs. White takes it and says, show me. Just as I was pointing out, giving up the knight pawn, this g pawn, black gave up their knight pawn, and black will now have pressure against the white king. How much pressure? Let's find out. We have knight to d5. This is already generating a threat. Do you see the threat here? If g3 is played just to make a dummy move, knight c3. You're getting the rook. Oh, and if you take the knight, guess who's excited about getting to the b file? There goes the queen. Okay, so how do you parry this threat? You get your queen off of the same file as the king. Rook to b8. Another threat. It's defended. Okay, the bishop has the knight under control. Black takes on d4. Recapture. Bishop f6. Pressure against the knight. Knight to b3. Let's get a few more moves in and pause. Move 22. How are things standing? Excellent for black. Black is down a pawn, but has more than enough compensation for it. Every black piece is better than their counterpart. If there is, what is it about this position that sticks out to me most? The quality of the knights. This guy on d5 is a beast. The knight on b3, not well positioned at all and pinned. Notice the nice coordination black has, striking at b2. This is a real problem for white. So let's see how white tries to untangle. Also note there's some pressure on c2, so it's defended with rook to c1. Never a fun move to make, going from an open file to a closed file to simply babysit a pawn. But here we are. That's where it is. That's the position white finds himself in right now. Babysitter mode. Okay, knight to b6. If you thought the knight on d5 was a pest, wait until you see him on c4. Two different checking squares, and yeah, that b2 point is really having some pressure on it. Okay, so what is white coming up with? He's trying to get the queens off. Rook to e4, a support point for now bishop f4, a skewer. Is white winning material? No. There will often be plenty of cases where you can find your way out of a tactic based on an unprotected piece in the position. So in this case, there's an unprotected queen on a6. So the queen goes to b6. No time to take the rook. The queen would fall. In the game, we have queen takes queen, rook takes queen. So if you find yourself in a similar scenario as this, one of the squares that should be lighting up in your mind, or one of the squares I think that would be a good idea to have lit up in your mind, is the intersection square between these two pieces. This square in particular. Okay. Sometimes a queen, maybe a rook, in some variations. All right, in this game it's queen b6. The queens are off. White is still up a pawn. Is the attack over? The queens are off. It's not over. The pressure is still there. Every one of black's pieces is still better than white's pieces. And this a pawn right here is just a couple moves away from scaring this knight. Yeah, and if this knight has to move, that b2 pawn, yeah, if that pawn falls, it's over. So, let's see what white tries to come up with here. Trying to simplify, but yeah, it's not going to be easy. No time to take this pawn. Firouzja is ducking this threat here and generating a threat of his own, right? The knight's ready to move, and there goes the unprotected rook. So some security for the rook on e4 against this threat. And here comes the a-pawn, ready to scare the knight away. At this point, the pressure is so much that, yeah, that knight White deems it as intolerable, needs to go. Just to highlight another attempt, if you think about maybe c3 in this position, scaring the rook away, that's not going to work either. c3 with the idea to, let's say, go to c2 and defend b2, that's not working because a4 is still there. And after the knight moves, can chop the knight and then take advantage of this pin. And there goes the exchange. So, white is in a serious pickle. Gives up the exchange. He has a pawn for it. We enter some imbalanced position. A very good decision, I feel, on white's part. Get rid of that knight. So, let's see how this next phase plays out. It's turned very imbalanced. Right now, white has 3 connected passed pawns, but they are all still home. Are they a serious threat? Not yet. Will they ever be a threat? That's another question. Let's see. Rook goes back to the b file. He just quickly plucked that pawn on the h file. There's now a 4-2 majority for black on the king side. Now returns and makes white work a little bit harder before this knight can actually move. So bishop d2. How to make progress here? Get those pawns rolling. Rook moves. I don't know if any rook moves by black is really an improvement. The bishop, it's optimally placed there. It's on the main diagonal. So pawn play right around this stage. c3. Blunting this diagonal, the king is now ready to improve. g5, king c2, g4. Right around here, there's a turning point. Considered best is a capture on f3. And then working with this passed h-pawn, but instead we have g3 with the intention to create a passed g-pawn one day, but it's going to require a successful h3 pawn break. And that's not a guarantee. And no guarantee that black can successfully get in that h3 move. Can these guys get rolling? Let's see. First it's b3, a4, some progress by white now. Knight e2, improving the knight post, pressure on g3. That's defended. White gets the pawns rolling. e5, bishop e3, bishop g5, dark square bishops are gone, pressure on h3, rook h5. An interesting moment right here. This pawn is defended, but this rook is unprotected. There's a pin here. In the game, we have king c3, maybe preparing to next play b4 and c5, now that c4 is defended. Also, you're off of this second rank from a potential check. What potential check am I referring to? Well, a move that white can consider here instead of king c3, the move played in the game, is knight takes g3, taking advantage of the pin. Black can play rook g5, and after knight e4, there's rook takes g2 with check. How exactly to assess this position? I don't know. It's too tough. I really don't know how to assess this one. It almost feels like it's easier to play as white. This guy's close to falling. There's a knight that's super tricky. These guys, yeah, kind of scary. Tough one to call. This isn't something he goes for. Instead, king c3, f5. There's still another opportunity to take on g3. Knight takes g3 here. Yeah, it's not as effective because there's no longer knight to e4. So if you're going to play knight to g3, knight takes g3, it's best to actually capture it at this very moment. Move 44. Instead, king c3, black establishes a pawn on f3. these passers continue, and this last one, move 46, was a blunder, and hard to blame any player, really, from making a blunder at this stage. They're both basically in bullet mode. At this stage, there is a 10-second increment, but they're both under a minute around this phase in the game, this move of the game. Instead of a5, which turns out to be the losing move of the game, surprisingly enough, this cringe move, knight g1, is something to consider. Yeah, going back home and making your rook look ridiculous for a move, but the knight is going to be a very efficient defender against potential passed pawns on the king side. Next up, knight h3, activate the rook, and then work on these guys, get them advancing. I could easily see this. I could see this game go in either direction if knight to g1 is on board. It may be the case black has to find some very accurate moves in order to stop these three connected passers from scoring a touchdown. Okay. At the end of the day, there is not this prophylactic move, knight to g1. Instead, he gets marching with a5. I'm not going to go into the details on this, but the computer says that b5 is actually is still holding as a draw. So that was a little interesting to me. I looked at the differences between these two moves. I think in general, when you're in these situations, you're low on time, you just go with whatever's instinctual to you. I think one train of thought would be with a5 is, you know what, it's further away from the black king. He's going to have a harder time tracking that pawn down. A difference here with b5, a difference that may run through a chess player's mind is that with b5, there's a square now for the king to move forward up to. b4 is vacated, and also if I can get to b7, I'd be hitting the rook. I'm getting maybe a valuable tempo. Anyhow, just some train of thought to share with you. Okay, in this game, it is a5, and now we have h3, giving up a pawn so that this guy is now passed. And after this move, we have a very nice moment captured by Lennart Otis, the official photographer for this event, capturing Duda. Yeah, he's, I think, trying his best to remain concentrated. And Firouzja, still contemplating his 47th move, appears to me to be cool as a cucumber. Kind of has this, I got this look. I'm in control. Anyhow, just moments later, do we see Firouzja's move? It is e4, giving up another pawn. After the capture on e4, we now have 7 passers present, 5 for white, 2 for black. But it is often the case with pawns, it is more so about quality than quantity. These guys are extra dangerous. The deeper the pawns are, the pawns that have more depth are often more dangerous. They get rolling, in this case, in this game, immediately. g2 with tempo. The h-pawn falls with check. King d4. f3, attacking the knight. Not really. White doesn't have to react to that threat just yet. First plays c5. And now we have one preventative move, one prophylactic move, king f7 by black. Taking the knight means that white will be able to take on g2 with check and then scoop up the e-pawn. And good luck trying to stop these. It says it's equal. Yeah, Still some work to do to stop him. Okay, king f7. Now black's ready to scoop up the knight. Knight f4 was played. And after f2, white resigns. No time to take the rook. Take the rook. Get a queen. There is no stopping black from getting a queen. Pawn quality, not quantity. That's the big takeaway from this game, this ending at least, that will often surface. Quality over quantity. Another variation at this stage is king e3. This is something I tested out. And after pawn takes knight, king takes pawn, black can go hunting for this guy. While white picks up the g pawn, black gets the b pawn, and these guys are all split, isolated, weak, and will easily be hunted. White has to worry even about maybe getting mated soon. Okay, anyhow, in this game it was knight f4, and these two pawns, at the end of the day, were too much. Okay, anyhow, that's all for this video. Feel free to leave any feedback in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.